Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm back to do another weekly reading update. I don't have any sort of preface for this, so I'm just gonna jump right in. So I'm gonna start with a book that I didn't finish, and I'm only mentioning this because I talked about it last week. And I always debate about whether or not to talk about books that I don't finish because I don't always feel like I have anything to really share. The vast majority of the time when I don't finish books, it's because I know I'm not in the mood for them. So I didn't finish Daughter from the Dark by Marina and Sergei Dyachenko. Like I mentioned in last week's video, I read and absolutely adored Vita Nostra, but I could not get into this book at all. I gave it about 100 pages, which is usually my limit, and this book is not super long, so 100 pages is a decent amount. And I don't know if it's my headspace or the book or what, but just wasn't for me. It's very stiff in my opinion, and I had a feeling that something was going to happen, and right when I got to the 100-page mark I'm well, something happened, but it wasn't enough to keep me motivated enough to keep going. So in the story you are following this main character who's a DJ basically, and he's walking home late at night when he sees this little girl on the streets, and he runs into some not great people, and he runs and grabs the girl and brings her back to his apartment, and the girl basically claims that this guy is her father, but she also might be from another realm / have magical abilities. She also has a stuffed doll that's a bear that might come to life and kill people, at least for the first part of the book. Obviously I didn't finish it. You're not really sure what's true and what's not, and is this DJ just going mad and all of those sorts of things. So yeah, I think I just can't handle a book like this right now. And this is the same translator as Vita Nostra, but this book felt so much clunkier in terms of the translation. I think I also just really like Vita Nostra a lot more because I love magical school stories, and this is not that at all. So it just wasn't working for me on a lot of different levels. And since it's due back at the library, I just figured I would stop reading it instead of forcing myself to read it because I was never excited to pick up this book. Next up, I have Djinn Patrol on the Purple Line by Deepa Anapara, and this was a really interesting reading experience for me. So this is a fictional book that is set in India, and you are following a couple of different kids who all live in the same neighborhood or slum. The story is told entirely from the perspective of this 9-year-old boy named Jai, who, when the story starts, there's a boy who goes missing who's a couple of years older than him. It becomes this kind of mystery sort of thing where he decides that he's going to be a detective and try to figure out what's going on, and he recruits his friends into it and stuff like that. So I will admit that in the beginning I had a hard time getting into this book. I think I just in general have a hard time getting into books that are for adults, adult fiction, that are written from the point of view as kids. But the farther I got into it, the more I kind of understood what was going on here. And there's also an author's note at the end that explains a lot of her sort of decisions of choosing a narrator and how she chose this story, which I found to be really helpful as well. So the story is mostly focusing on how there are a lot of kids who go missing. The numbers for sure are over 100, but I don't remember the exact number cited in here. And so in this story, you're following basically how this one area deals with these kids continually going missing, the police not doing anything, as well as the police protecting the extremely rich, divisions that are created because some people decide that it's Muslim people who are taking their kids because it's only Hindu kids who are going missing, all of this stuff, along with just the extreme amounts of poverty and stuff like that. So I think that if you're someone who's interested in stuff along those lines, this book will really appeal to you. I do think this book is sort of marketed and even named terribly because it makes it sound like it's a mystery and these kids are kind of going on adventures, and kind of in an Elegance of the Hedgehog kind of way, where there's this kid protagonist who's a detective trying to solve crimes. If you are someone who's looking for a straightforward mystery with a nicely tied up ending, this is not going to provide that for you at all. But I think that if you're someone who enjoys literary fiction and enjoys these sort of explorations of these worlds of people whose voices and stories are very rarely ever told, this would 100% be up your alley. So I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Again, like I said, I had a little bit of trouble getting into it, but by the middle, I really got into it, and it will make you sad, but it's a very important book. I hate using that word, but I think it's a book with stories that need to be heard and told. All right, next up, I finished This Too Shall Last by KJ Ramsey, and the subtitle to this is Finding Grace When Suffering Lingers. So I do have to preface this by saying this is a Christian book, and I don't talk about Christian books really at all on here. Like, I honestly have no idea if I've ever talked about a Christian book on here, but the main reason for that is because I usually hate most of them. And it's usually pretty rare that I like read one on my own. If I do read them, it's usually like in the context of a Bible study or something like that. So it's not really my place, I feel like, to do any sort of like review or like give any sort of commentary on my channel, because it feels completely separate. It's kind of like when you're studying a book at school. I would never like talk about a book like that because you're reading it in a completely different way in light. So I just thought I would talk about it because it might appeal to some of you. So KJ Ramsey is someone who I follow online, like on Twitter and stuff like that, and I've read some of her writing before and stuff like that. So I was already like familiar with her writing style, and I was always really interested in this book because I think that, at least in a lot of Western churches, and I probably should say like Western white dominating churches, suffering is something that is very rarely discussed, and usually, people continually try to put their best foot forward or the best face forward and are not really willing to openly talk about suffering in their lives, the problems that they're dealing with, the sins that they're dealing with, stuff like that. So I was always interested in this, and I actually like pre-ordered a copy of it, and it arrived, I think it came out in either April or May, and I was like, the timing of this book right now in the midst of 2020 was something else. So I read this book like super slowly as well. I think I read it over the course of 2 months, even though it's only like 10 chapters and not very long, but it's mostly because I wanted to really sit with the ideas that are talked about in here. Now, I will say, if you're not a Christian, I don't know how much this will appeal to you, because this is very much like a Christian book. Like, she talks about the gospel and God and the way churches operate and all of this stuff. And so it's hard for me to say whether or not this will appeal to you, or like if you don't mind those sorts of things in your books, then maybe you'll still be interested in this. But I really did appreciate KJ Ramsey's candor. She suffers from a chronic illness, and so she does discuss in here sort of her own struggles and her own doubts and the way that has affected her faith, and how she's learned to, like the subtitle says, finding grace and joy in the midst of suffering and stuff like that. And so I feel like, in general, if you are living in this world, you're going to face suffering of some kind, and sort of learning how to deal with that gracefully and in a way that honors God is important, and not something that's discussed as much as, at least I would hope. But I feel like it's becoming more and more normal to talk about those things, which is nice. And I think that this book provides a lot of sort of points for self-reflection, self-examination, sort of looking at the way that you approach your own suffering and whether or not you're actually dealing with it or not. There are like certain topics or areas that I feel like I would have wanted more in, but for the most part, I really enjoyed this book a lot, and it definitely gave me a lot to think about. And finally, I read Giant Days Volume 4. So this is a like contemporary comic series, if you aren't aware. It's really fun. You're following mainly these 3 girls who are attending university together in the UK. It's a little bit weird to give like any sort of synopsis beyond that, because this is an ongoing comic series, but honestly I think that this volume is my favorite volume potentially since like the first one, and I think it might have just been like the way the third one read to me. I just adored this one so much more than the third one, so it's kind of hard for me to say completely. But I think it's because in the third one, a lot of the issues are about like basically pairing up different characters together, like different combinations of characters, and so they basically like split up the 3 main girls and had them hanging out with other like side characters in their world, which was fine. But I think that this series shines the best when the girls are together, or at least 2 of the girls are together. I just found it to be extremely fun and delightful. There's like an entire issue in here about the girls trying to find like housing for their next year of college that I just found to be really, really fun. There's another sort of section in here about one of the characters like giving a campus tour and the sort of hijinks of that, and that was again just really amusing. There's another issue, or it might have been the same issue, where one of the girls is basically getting back into dating after breaking up in a serious relationship, and she basically goes on 3 dates over the course of one day, and that was just like so much fun. It made me really happy, and I really enjoyed it. And again, this might have been my favorite volume so far, or like one of my favorites for sure. So I'm really enjoying this. I can't wait to pick up more. I honestly don't know how many volumes of this currently exist in the world. I feel like there are a lot, but I will be continuing on with this. So that is everything I have for you this week. In terms of what I'm currently reading, as always, I'm reading the Frederick Douglass biography, as always. This is the second week where I've said that, but I've been keeping on track with this, partially because I find it really interesting, so I'm like inclined to pick it up, but also I've realized that I can't really do more than like 2 chapters of this at a time, so I don't want to fall too far behind because it'll be harder for me to catch up, because basically I realize like with biographies like this, after about 2 chapters, maybe 3, my brain starts to like zone out quite a bit. So yeah, I've been pretty good about keeping up with my chapters for this, but I'm really enjoying that biography. And then the other thing I'm currently in the middle of is Murder at the Grand Raj Palace by Wasim Khan. I'll talk about this obviously more next week, but I just adore this series and it's just like making me really happy, which is something I needed right now. So this is the 4th book in the Baby Ganesh series. The first book is The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra, and it takes place in India. I've been reading a lot of books that take place in India lately, but it takes place in India and you are following this retired police officer who ends up becoming a private detective. I'm reading this specifically for Red or Dead next week, so again, I'll talk about it more once I finish it. So yeah, that is everything I have for you this week. Let me know down in the comments below how your reading has been going, whether you've read any of the books that I talked about here, or feel free to tell me about a book that you've been enjoying recently. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.